guys, I'm Linda.
I'm Vicki.
I'm Margie.
I'm Keith.
And we are Partners in Crime. Today, before we start on the Innocence Project cases that we wanted to review, we were watching a lot of the videos on Netflix. So we wanted to review some of the cases that we found very interesting. Before that, I did want to, and I should have done this a lot sooner, I did want to plug my husband's book. It's In the Wrong Hands. It is sold on Amazon, and you can get a Kindle version as well. So you can find it under Porter Eidam or In the Wrong Hands. And then there's a picture of my husband on the back. So it is a crime novel. This is his first novel, and I just wanted to bring that out to everyone. So please purchase it. Let us know what you think about it.
It's good.
Yeah, Vicki purchased it, and Marjorie did as well. So,
Yeah.
And of course I read it, but even though he's my husband, I really do think it's a good crime novel. So I just wanted to present that to everyone, and hopefully you'll purchase it and let me know what you think.
And how much is he paying us for this?
Lots and lots
Good.
of
I just wanted to make that clear.
wine. No. I wanted to go over the case of Franky Carrillo. He was accused of murdering Donald Sarpy in 1991. He was in jail for over 20 years. Donald was actually killed in a drive-by shooting. This was in Linwood, California, which is outside of Los Angeles. Franky was actually, I believe he was 16 or 18 at the time of the murder. And he was involved in a gang called the Young Crowd. This is a Latino gang. He actually was part of the gang, not because he was initiated into the gang. His sister actually married one of the leaders of the gang, so he kind of got initiated into it without actually having to join the gang and do what they make them do to get initiated. You know, they make them kill people and that sort of thing. So
he was a gang-in-law.
He was a gang-in-law, yes. And on the night of the murder, he was actually with his father at home. His father, you know, they had dinner and he was doing his homework. It was on a Friday night. His father wound up, before he was actually on trial, passed away. So his only
alibi.
Yeah, his only alibi was his father, and he actually couldn't take the stand in his son's defense. So Scotty Turner was one of the boys. Well, let me set the stage for this. So they are outside the house of Donald Sarpy. His son Damien was out with a group of his friends. So we had this Scott Turner, a Jeff Coleman, a James Munnerlin, a Montre Mitchell, and a Marcus Stewart. They were outside of the house. His father, Damien's father, came out just to say, hey guys, keep it down. You know, it was in a nice neighborhood. You know, this was a bad part of town, but in their neighborhood, it was a pretty nice neighborhood. So Donald came out just to say, hey guys, chill. And there was a car that came by down the road, and I believe the guy said that it went around, and the second time it came around, when it went past them, someone went out of the window and shot at them. So they all started scattering. Ultimately, Donald, the father, was actually hit by one bullet and died. So after this happened, the one kid, Scott Turner, who was one of the kids standing there, so Scott was brought in to take a look at photos. There was like a book of 500 photos of these gang members in the area. Lieutenant Craig Ditch was the sheriff who was investigating this murder, and he had Scott in there. He knew Scott from previous cases, so Scott's looking at this book of like 500 photos, and he's pointing at this guy, and the Ditch is like, nah, he's in jail. Well, it looks like this guy. No, it can't be him. So he's going and listing all these people he thinks it could be, and Ditch is saying no, no. So he points to Frankie, and he said, okay, it looks like this guy. And he's like, yeah, that's him. Ditch is like, yeah, that's him. So at this point, you know, Scotty doesn't think he knows who it is. He's just trying to get the heck out of there because he's asking him all these questions and he just wants to be done with it. They did not realize that he had worked with Ditch before until we get into the show, and they are interviewing Ditch once it gets to the Innocence Project. They're interviewing him, and they did ask him, so you knew Scotty before you started talking to him? He's like, well, yeah. And they're like, well, why didn't you think that that was something that you should have told the court? And he said, well, I didn't think it was important. So he knew that he could manipulate this kid to say, yeah, this was the guy. So they do have the other kids. They aren't brought in until 6 months later. So these other kids that were there, even the son of Donald, was not brought in until 6 months later. After Scotty did point out this one kid, Frankie, they also brought in, they gave him another set of pictures to look at. There were 6 photos, and he picked out one, which was Frankie. Turns out that in 6 months, after they bring in these other kids, Scotty already told them who he picked, and he told them which picture he picked. Ditch did not change the photos in that that sheet, so he left Frankie as number 1. So they all knew that's who they were supposed to pick out. Frankie did have a trial. The first trial was a hung jury because these kids were brought in as witnesses, and it was only eyewitnesses. There was no other evidence other than the eyewitnesses. So they brought them into trial, and the initial trial, they're like, well, I think it was him. Well, it could have been. It was dark. So these kids really didn't have their story straight because they really didn't see who this was. And they basically picked out Frankie from these photos because they were told, this is the guy that Scott picked. This is the photo that you're supposed to pick. So after they did that, so it was a hung jury. They had to have another trial. So I believe a couple months later, they did have another trial for Frankie. In that trial, the jurors were not told that they had a trial, an initial trial, and that it was a hung jury. So they didn't even know there was a trial to begin with. There was a one trial. Mary Ann Escalante was the deputy district attorney who was prosecuting Frankie for this. There was also a Gary L. Wells who was not part of the trial, but he was an eyewitness identification expert who talked about the process of, you know, eyewitnesses and that sort of thing. And he said, after you see even a lineup or a bunch of photos, you eventually will pick someone that looks similar to the person you think did it. So it's not necessarily you know, cut and dry that that's the person who did it. You kind of just look for someone similar, and that doesn't necessarily mean it was the person that actually did the murder.
You want to pick somebody, I guess, right?
Yeah.
There's a tendency for you to try to want to pick somebody instead of just sitting there and not pick anybody. I think, human tendency to pick someone.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of suggestion goes a long way.
And
Exactly.
Pressure. A little pressure.
Yeah. So when they did have the second trial, Damien, Donald's son, was so sure that Frankie was the one that actually killed his father. So he said he was sitting there and he wanted to go across the room and just strangle his neck, because he was so sure that he was told that was who killed his father, and he wanted revenge against Frankie. Frankie did say, though, Scott Turner was like the number one eyewitness to this. Like, he was the major witness. And Frankie said he never really even knew him, never saw Scott before. Scott said he had seen Frankie, but that's just because they live in the same area, that he knew that he was, involved in this gang. They have their own gang. So when Frankie did have his trials, his defense attorney was a Robin Yanes. And he said, because he was so young, he just thought that the adults in the room were going to do what they needed to do, that justice would be served. That wasn't the case. Like, his defense attorney didn't really even talk to him. He said he might have had one conversation with them the whole time for like 2 to 3 minutes. So this poor kid who doesn't know anything, whose father's sick, is depending on the courts and the lawyers and, like you said, all the adults in the room to do the right thing. Unfortunately, they don't always do that. And it's such a sad system, especially the one district attorney in the area that they spoke with too said that there was a lot going on at that time in the early 1990s, and there was a lot of gang violence. There was so many murders due to gangs. So he said getting a gang member off the street was basically just a good thing. Regardless, they just wanted to get them off the street. So that kind of, messed up them thinking that we're doing the right thing or we're not. They just needed to get these people off the street because of all the murders. So this Brentford Fier, who was the district attorney, he did have his suspicions during the first trials that Ditch, the sheriff Ditch, was credible. He wasn't too sure if he was. So he had his, his ideas that he might not have been. Let's see what else. Before Frankie Scott was going to testify against Frankie, they were both in a holding cell because Scott was in jail at that point. And Frankie saw him and he's like, all right, I'm going to go sit next to him. He just stayed cool. He sat next to him. He leaned over and he said, I know you're Scott. And he's like, I'm not Scott. I'm this person or whatever. And he's like, I know you are. And he's like, you know what, man, I know you didn't do it. I know it wasn't you, and I'm going to set the record straight. So he did get taken out of the room, and Frankie did hear him talking to the district attorney, saying, you know what, it's not him. This is how I was brought to that, the sheriff or Ditch told me to, yeah, that's him, and I know it wasn't him. It was too dark to see. So he's basically saying, everything I said was wrong. And I lied and I shouldn't have said that. And it wasn't Frankie that did it. So instead of bringing this in to court, the district attorney sat on it and they didn't, they still held him, held the trial. They didn't bring in this evidence. And Frankie was ultimately found guilty in his second trial. Wow. So like I said, he was in jail for 20 years.
Awful.
Yeah, he did have a son. He was pretty young, like I said, 16 or 18, and before he did go to jail, he did have a son with a girlfriend. So by the time he got out of jail, his son was already 20 years old. And he said it was really hard, obviously, to be a father when you're in jail. So you're just relying on letters and that sort of thing. So we go 20 years later and the Innocence Project gets wind of this. And we have an Ellen Eggers who actually became his lawyer, and she brought this to the Innocence Project. Linda Starr was part of the Innocence Project, and she actually did go to court with Ellen to have a judge take a look at this case again to try to get him exonerated. Let's see.
And I understand that's not an easy thing for them to do, to get a judge after somebody's already gone through trial and they've had a conviction, and for the Innocence Project to even get before a judge is really difficult for them.
Right.
So definitely.
Yeah, they have to
start from the square, from the, they have to bring everything, get all the evidence again.
You got to overcome, bias of, well, what are you, on the side of the criminals now, right?
Right.
Even if you're in the Innocence Project, even if the person's innocent, there's a perception of, well, they're arrested and they're guilty, and that's...
Exactly.
Well, Ellen...
And these district attorneys, they don't like them, they don't admit when they're wrong.
Right.
They don't want to admit that they made a mistake.
Yeah.
In the first place, right. And it's, there's a lot of community pressure around it.
Oh yeah, the victims and the people in the community, because you want to get bad guys in prison.
Right, and the family members of the people who...
And you want to catch the person,
right.
Get them.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and something else about Sheriff Ditch. In that county, LA County, they had, in the Sheriff's Department, this group of sheriffs who called themselves the Vikings. So they were a gang inside the Sheriff's Department. And they were pretty bad. They did some bad stuff to some of the gang members as far as like beating them and all that kind of stuff. So they thought, you know what? We're going to take care of business because the law isn't on our side. Yeah. They even had tattoos on their ankles, the Vikings.
And the ends justify the means, and that kind of thinking is like, well, we're getting rid of bad guys. So if we do little things that aren't quite,
Right.
It's just like that whole thing with the exculpatory evidence.
Yeah.
Where it's like they don't want to admit that because everything's gets nuanced, and when it's innocent till proven guilty, if there's any little tiny bit of exculpatory evidence, it could, the benefit of the doubt could go into the hands of the accused.
Yeah.
And it's already hard to get people. I mean, a lot of crimes, homicides are not. Many of them are not solved. Like 60% of homicides are not solved.
Yeah.
Only 40% get convictions. So it's a hard thing to do. So I can see how that can be influence you because I'm just like,
Yeah. Well, 1 year before the trial, there was a guy named Oscar Rodriguez, who was actually in the gang, and he said that he was part of the murder. He was in the car, he knew who did it, and they did not bring that to trial. So the prosecutor and the judge said, nope, we're not including this in the trial. So they had someone saying that they were a part of this, and they didn't even take it.
Wow.
So as the years went on, Oscar just wouldn't say anything more about it because he was trying to say, this kid wasn't there, he didn't do it, and they didn't listen to him. So he said, screw y'all, you want to ask me later, I'm not saying anything.
Right.
So it's really crazy.
So is he still in jail today?
No, he's out of jail.
Okay.
One thing too about the witnesses. One of the witnesses, actually James Munnerlin, wasn't even on that side of the street. He was actually across the street. Wow. And this kid said that, he saw who was in there. He couldn't see the passenger who shot at the kids. He was on the driver's side. So there was no way that he could have seen who did it. And he also said that he saw who did it. So many strange things were in there. When the Innocence Project did get a hold of this, and they were able to have a hearing before a judge, which took them many years before they could get in front of a judge for this. Marianne Escalante, the prosecutor who had prosecuted the case initially, she actually started crying on the stand when she was on when she was in this hearing, and she said that Damien Sarpy, Donald's son, actually said to her, you know what, I didn't see him. I didn't see it was Frankie, and I should never have said it was him. So then the prosecutor's like, oh my gosh, I would never have done this if I would have known that these witnesses weren't credible, that they didn't see what they saw. This is what she says now, but some of the evidence,
she withheld a lot.
Exactly, especially the Oscar guy that said he knew who.
It's your job to prosecute people and put them in prison, and then you want to believe the things. It's like you don't want to question stuff that basically helps you do your job.
Yep.
It's a hard thing, man.
It is. The judge actually, so the lawyers are like, how, with all of this evidence, we still need something else for this judge to take a look at, because they wanted to make sure that he realized that it was so hard for these people to even eyewitness him doing this. So they actually took the judge out to the street and they recreated this scenario. And thank God they had the perfect evening. The moon was out. They had a clear sky. They had the judge come out. They had a car go by. Nobody there could ID anyone in the car. So the judge saw it firsthand that, you know what, we couldn't see it. Those kids didn't see it. Plus, they're in perfect circumstances. Nobody's trying to shoot at them.
Right. These
kids, all of a sudden, somebody's shooting a gun. They're gonna, duck, and they're gonna try to get to safety. So, it was crazy that all of this stuff happened to this kid, and like he said, he thought the adults in the room were gonna take care of him, and unfortunately, it took 20 years before they.
I mean, that's the thing that the criminal justice system has learned over time, because before an eyewitness was like, that was the before DNA evidence and stuff, that was, and then now we can see how unreliable it can be, because people will think they saw something, or they want to believe that they saw it.
Yep.
And then they don't want to, I guess, look like fools or whatever, but they don't want to let go of what they think is real or what they saw, right? Well, it's hard for a person to let go of that.
We've talked about in other videos that we talk about how people will create a story in their mind,
right,
and believe that it's
real.
True,
right,
and that happens a lot, I'm sure, with these kinds of cases, especially after all those months go by, and you're telling yourself that happened.
Hey, you don't need to be married for too long to know that stuff happens, right? Because even it happens between spouses and stuff, where one spouse believes something, and they're just and it's not absolutely true. It ain't totally false. It's like there's some suggestion and there's nuance, and it's like, well, it's hard to. You must got to be trained.
Do you know my husband?
Well, I know people. I know humans. I've been studying humans, and myself too, because everything that I'll believe that's true.
Yeah.
And I'll think I saw something.
Yeah.
Like Margie bust something, and I'll be like, I know you broke it.
There's no one there other than her to say it was the dog. Yeah.
There was something that just happened, and I thought.
Margie did
my phone?
The phone.
That was so weird.
She just crazy. Her phone was like a shattered mess for a long time. She gets a new phone, and there's this, and I see it. There's like a little ding on the side of it, and I was like, I know that she had to have dropped it, and she was like, nope. I was like, the forensic. I'm an engineer, so I know that. You don't just drop something like that, and it has this little chip inside.
What happened was it flipped on the table, and then after I picked it up, and then he saw that there's a crack, he goes, "This didn't happen from this instant."
Yeah, it goes like this. It goes like that. It goes like this, and it's I'm like, no, there's a crack in there. Yeah. I'm like, no, there's no way that causes that, and that's what I imagine that's what police things go through. You get something, you try to piece it together, and then you put things in your mind from your past or from other memories or other cases, and you're like, wow, maybe it happened like this.
Yeah.
And then you want to believe it.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
it doesn't help when the sheriff's department is actually, and you're in a gang,
Yeah.
and they're pressuring you. So even when
Totally.
the Innocence Project got this, the sheriff's department then went out and started to try to get people to not talk to
Recruit
them. Or to say, well, you know, they're pressuring you.
Yeah, they could
and
become the enemy of
Yeah.
the police.
Yeah.
This Innocence Project.
it's
could be an
ridiculous.
enemy.
I mean, they got
are,
caught
though.
wind of this, and
Yeah.
they started going out to these witnesses saying, you know, are they pressuring you? Are you really sure you knew what, or you know,
Right,
what you
I mean,
said
that's-
initially wasn't
Yeah.
true? And so all of this stuff is going on, and it's just so crazy how once a law enforcement department, and not all of them, but once some of them get a hold of this, they know that if this person is wrongly incarcerated and put in jail, that they can then sue them if they come out.
That's right.
So they wanted to keep him in jail so they wouldn't get sued. Now, how horrible is that?
Yeah, it's true.
But I mean, and that's the thing about the flaws of the justice system, which are, you know, they're our own human flaws in a way. Just
But
Right?
at that point, you don't do the right thing.
Yeah.
Just it's not coming out of your pocket.
No.
You know what I mean? So
But it makes them
It's
look
humans,
bad,
man.
Right.
And they don't want that kind of reputation. And,
right,
and you know, the families of the victims.
that's another part.
They're, you know, saying you got them. You know, you can't let them out. They're pressured
Yeah.
to believe that. Well, the families are.
well, they want closure, and they're like,
Yeah.
okay, we got the guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Now
they
I can
move
rest.
on.
And you hear the
Yeah.
families who are interviewed, you know, how they're under distress, there's such stress for them to get that closure and to find the person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Who
there's
did
the
it?
stress of our own human condition, our own ego, where we want to be right. We want to be right about something.
Right.
And we're just like so hard to back people off of that commitment to rightness. Whatever it is, whatever you believe.
Well, I have a
you
question.
can religion, politics,
Right.
right? I mean, you talk to
Yeah.
people that are really committed in their beliefs. You're not going to knock them off of it because their commitment to being right is so powerful.
That's right.
It's like the part of their identity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I have a question about the Innocence Project.
Mm-hmm.
Who began that? And how do they decide who's going to be representing what case? I mean, is it a,
Well, it's that Barry
It's
Scheck
districts.
from the O.J. Simpson.
well, he's
Lawyer.
the one who formed this?
I thought he.
Well, they
I'm
have
looking
different
up,
districts though, because there are different Innocence Projects in different
well,
areas.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so
it's-
there was
it's-
one specifically in LA. That's who took this on.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it's not specifically an organization. It's a concept.
I believe it is an organization, but they have to have branches all over the place because of different people in different areas of the country. You have to
Okay.
have those people in that area. You can't just fly all over the country, you know what I mean?
Well, and I wonder too, like, you know, we only hear about the ones that they were successful at.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you-
there's many they're
It's
not.
Do
very
they
hard to
make
even-
bad choices and pick actual people that are guilty and try to, because
Well,
of the nature of evidence and
I
how
think
it's,
if you visit a prison, okay.
everybody's innocent.
Well,
I've
no,
been-
they're all
I've
innocent.
visited, I've
believe
visited
it.
prisons. I know, there ain't a guilty
Believe it
person
or
in
not,
They're all in,
the
yeah.
one lawyer, Ellen Eggers, said, you would think that's what everybody thinks. She said, actually, that's not true. Most people that are guilty will
Will
say
tell
they're
you.
guilty. She said it's
That ain't my
misleading. People
experience.
think that everybody's going to say that they're innocent, but that's not as frequent as you would expect, believe it or
Yeah.
not. And she's a lawyer who defends people. So, yeah, so I thought
Oh,
that
that-
too before she
I would
said
like
that.
to see the numbers on that
Yeah.
because
But we did see
it
numbers
seems to
about
me
it.
that it's rare that a person just owns what they did and admits
Well,
it
they're
and
already
and
there.
takes their thing.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it until they're in prison, and
Yeah.
you know who's going to say they're not under oath. They probably just tell them on the side, "Yeah, I did it." You
Yeah.
know what I mean? They're
Yeah,
not, or
yeah.
they're not
Well,
pressing.
the
this-
lawyers won't say, you know,
Yeah.
'cause
Well, a lot
representing
of
them.
Yeah, well, I definitely like to see something on that because
Well, you
I know
did.
a lot of people that are in prison claim they are victims.
We,
I was set up.
we did it- we-
My dad beat me, and
We
all that
talked
stuff.
about a case called the Innocent Man.
Right.
And, I don't know if we talked about it yet, but we saw it.
Mhm.
Yep.
And,
We will, they're gonna go over that, yeah.
the, statistic came out that there were like
90,000 people.
90,000 people in prison.
4%, I think.
Yeah, the
was number,
percentage
but
seems small, but then when
Yeah.
you get to the actual number,
It's like a lot because there's millions of people in prison.
Right, there were
Millions.
like
We got the highest
90,000.
prison population on planet Earth. Yeah.
who are really innocent that shouldn't be there.
Right.
How they got to that, I don't know how they
Yeah.
determined
Well,
that.
they just do the percentage and the percentage of people, you know. kind
No,
of
no,
thing.
but how did they know that each individual in that 90,000 was actually really innocent? That's what I want to know. But
Well, they don't, but they're just saying that's the average. I mean, 4% of the population,
Is
and then you just
claiming?
do it. It's a number. Because there's millions of people incarcerated, and so
Well, what
it's
makes
a
them-
judgment. It's not something you can actually like
well,
ask
that
every
seems
person and measure.
pretty specific when you get a number like you're saying this percentage,
Yeah.
you know, and
it's
it
statistics.
equates to 90,000 people. Yeah,
It's statistics.
And maybe it was just thrown out there because it is in a documentary and they want people to
Yeah.
have a
Yeah,
number.
4% of people on death row are innocent, and it's just like yeah.
90,000 people.
Yeah, and I saw in there too, they showed that 20,000 people are falsely convicted, 1% of the prison population.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
All right,
it's not a
so-
lot.
And I'm going to just, I guess, wrap this up as far as this case is concerned. And Brentford Vieira, the prosecutor, was also in this hearing. So he starts, poking holes into the defense's case. And the one defense attorney's just sitting there like, oh my gosh, I'm like staring daggers at him. Ultimately, though, Brentwood said that he had an ethical duty and a legal duty to ask the judge to actually grant the petition to release Frankie. So even this prosecutor said,
Wow.
you know what? After all this, yeah, I can poke holes in this and this and this, but you know what, Judge? You should let this guy go.
Oh, that's good.
That was amazing. Like it brought tears to my eyes when I'm like
Stepped
looking
up.
at this. Like,
Wow,
oh, thank
that's great.
God.
That's
Thank
the
God.
other thing is like we are watching these Innocent Project shows, and then we're not watching, the day to day all
Right.
the work. And that probably won't make good for good television.
Yeah.
When prosecutors do a good job or the correct job or the fair job, that probably doesn't make for good television.
Yeah.
This stuff is so shocking because you think, well, it can happen to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, Frankie is out of jail. He has a family now. He is in touch with his son. He has 2 other little kids. And, he ultimately won a settlement against the sheriff's department and against the sheriff ditch for $10.1 million. So,
Wow.
well deserved.
Yeah.
If not more, he should have gotten more.
Right.
And he said now he can help with helping other people who are innocent get out of jail.
Yeah.
So, so it was a great story. It's sad. It's just sad to think, what if that's your son?
Yeah.
And somebody points the finger at them and they didn't do anything. And unfortunately, the case is, yes, he was in a gang, didn't really do anything with the gang, but because he's either
Guilt by association.
correct.
In a way,
Yeah. And because I'm going to say it, either if he's black or Latino, that puts another mark on their heads. So, it's just nice to know that he ultimately got out of jail.
Really.
Well, there's got to be incredible recovery too when you've been in prison for any amount of time and you're innocent and to come out, because there's that element of you've missed this amount of time, and if you had children,
Mhm.
them growing up and now they're adults, and
Right.
you can't get that back.
No.
And what are you going to do? I mean, the
Imagine.
settlement, you need that. Because
Yeah.
how do you function in the world? You have to
Yeah.
figure out how to function as a free man. That's not the easiest thing to do.
No.
So,
A lot of
You gotta
space,
get
a lot
a
of
job,
space.
you don't have any experience,
Yeah.
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Especially
so,
if you were arrested as when you're
kid.
young, you
Yeah.
got no training or experience. Yeah.
Yeah, except for any schooling you got in jail. And
Right.
so,
There
yeah.
are some cases, yeah, I guess in jail you can,
Yeah.
which is a good thing. It's
Yeah.
cool that you can do that,
Yeah,
you know,
so.
be productive.
Yeah. So, all right. So I think we're going to wrap this up, and I guess we'll say until next time.
Bye.